manage myself, I've got to manage my mind. The task is not easy, but to high heights I climb.
I'm determined to succeed, so no excuses, please. If you don't want success in life, then don't hinder me. Yes, let the whole world know you are a CEO. You are a CEO. I'm a CEO. You are a CEO. I'm a CEO. The time is here to celebrate. You are a CEO. You are a CEO. You are a CEO. You are a CEO. Yes, let the whole world know. The time is here to celebrate. Success is calling, so don't be late. You are a CEO.
I've got to manage.
Hello everyone, Michael E. Parker, and we are here tonight. It is June 3rd, and as promised, we have a special show for you. So as you can see on the screen, this is the show From Fear to Fuel, and we are going to be talking about a subject that almost everyone can relate to in some way. This is a subject that is near and dear to all of us. All of us are trying to not let fear hinder our life and be able to move past fear to fuel our success, fuel our goals, fuel our passions. And so I'm excited about this series that we're going to be talking about. And so we're going to take this in two parts. And tonight we're going to start off really understanding some critical things with regard to fear. And so now I'm going to bring a special guest in early on this because, you know, fear is really something that we talk about a lot, and this gentleman, as you all know, is always teaching and talking about subjects related to things that help us improve our thinking, our mind, especially with regard to the URCL philosophy. So I'm going to bring in Mr. Terry Fulton. So Terry, come on in, just walk on into the screen. It's good to see you.
Likewise.
Listen, this is tonight, we're talking about something that I know that you talk about all the time.
Yeah.
We're talking about fear. A lot of times it's related to personal awareness. When you just think about the subject of fear, what some things come to your mind initially?
Well, hopefully I'm not afraid
That's
to
right.
talk about the show. But
Right.
no, fear, the thing that comes to my mind is it's paralyzing. Fear can get you so trapped, and it's difficult to see anything beyond fear when you're experiencing it.
Right.
And so if we can help people get past that, then the next show 2 or 3,
Yeah.
I think we would have done a good job.
Absolutely. I like what you're talking about, just the paralysis of it all. And so I want to, let's jump into this though, because everyone now, we got a powerhouse team here with myself and Terry, loving to talk about some of these issues because we like to help people. I know you as a student, I should say a teacher of students before, I was able to steal you out of the academic world and come into URCO. But let's talk about one critical area, and this is really the incredible human brain. Now, this is something that we know you can't ignore the role that the brain plays if we deal with fear. Now, we're going to kind of walk into this in layers, but what do you think about just the magnificence of the brain? Because you study the brain a lot as well.
The most magnificent part of the brain is how little we know about it.
That's the truth.
Right?
Right.
So, we're still discovering, this whole brain plasticity is like breaking cutting edge science right now, right? So, even though they've been talking about it over the last, decade or so, that's still new relative to what we don't already know about the brain. So that is very interesting to me. And then also how the brain is shaped and formed into thoughts and how it drives so many aspects of our body, right? It's not just the thinking, it drives how we feel, temperature, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
But a lot of it is related directly to how we think.
And it's so amazing that there's this literal, piece of matter within our skull that somehow is related to how we feel, how thoughts are formed. It's just simply amazing. It's really a miracle, but at the same token, it's something that's so beneficial to our success, and yet something so lethal.
Right. It's like liberating and dangerous all at the same time.
Right.
So the more we know about it and the power of it, we can harness it and use it for good. And so
Right.
that's why we need to know about it.
Absolutely. So let's go a little bit deeper. Let's go a layer deeper. And so when we think about the brain now, sometimes it's broken down this way where we think about analytical thought. We look at, more of your, how you analyze, how you think about how to do things, use things, and then more of the creative design side, holistic thought. So I know you talk about this a lot. Why don't you say a little bit about this, because this has a lot to do with just the majesty of the brain.
Right. So, I mean, and that's not to say that, we're stuck on one side or the other, but it's good. And there are some assessments you could take even to see where you're at. But it's good to know where the dominant skill set that you have that exists in your brain. So some people's left side is more dominant. Doesn't mean that they're not creative.
Right.
It just means that they're more with the logical side. That's a strength that they have. That's just how their brain has been shaped and developed.
That's good.
Versus somebody that's a little more creative over time, shaped, developed that way. And there's probably chemistry involved in all of that, but that side just might be dominant. But the critical side is to know how to tap into both hemispheres and maximize your brain and try and get whole brain activity.
Right.
But still understand where your strengths are and where you might be lacking a little bit.
So hemispheres would be the right and left brain, right?
Yes, sir.
So when we say the hemisphere, we're saying the left, side and the right side. How to tap into both in a constructive way.
Yes, sir.
That helps me create success for myself, because I love what you said about how you can't say I'm a left-brained person,
Right.
I'm a right-brained.
Right.
You'd be in trouble if you were only one side of the hemisphere.
that's
So
right.
I think it's encouraging that, people don't have to put themselves in these boxes, but to understand, I love what you said about there's dominant traits that we have.
And that's the power of the brain, right? Know what you have access to and know what you're good at, where you might lack, and what you can develop. And so you can develop pretty much any skill that you want to. I may not be at your level of creativity,
Right.
but I could become more creative.
Sure.
Because I have access to it.
Right, and these elements are very important, right? Because the subject here is fear, and I think we had a career series not long ago when we were talking about how creative skills is a transferable skill.
Right.
But it's really something, the ability for people to think creatively, but you can do that with regard to fear too, right? You can get really creative in how bad the situation is, or you can be very analytical with your fear. So these hemispheres are even related to fear.
I'm doing workshops all the time, and it gets very creative. The minds that are in the room, just where people allow their mind to go and where their thinking goes, it's pretty amazing. As we often say, the biggest nation in the world is an imagination.
Yeah,
so
right.
It can really take off. But again, if you kind of know where your dominant is, then you can even see how fear shows up in your life.
That's really good. And so I want everyone to keep that in mind. That's a big nugget there. So making sure you consider, how does your dominant traits in terms of how you tend to use your brain or where your comfort zones are, how does that relate to how fear shows up and how you deal with fear? So let's go a step deeper. So now, there's a specific part of the brain called the amygdala. Now, I'm gonna show another slide here in a minute, but let's deal with this amygdala word. It sounds like it's something serious, but tell me a little bit about the amygdala and how important it is.
So a lot of people feel like, some people have, are in tune with their feelings because they have such a wonderful heart. No, that's your amygdala. Your amygdala acting up. That's where your feelings, that's where a lot of things that you feel goes through that area of the brain, right? And so there's a lot of different emotions that exist, but that's what fear is. It's an emotion. And the amygdala is like an alarm system, right? And that's when fear usually shows up in your life, because the alarm goes off. It says, hey, you're in trouble, protect yourself, uh-oh, get away, fight, flight, whatever, stand still, hope they don't see you. Did they not talk to you? What's wrong with them? What did I do? All of those things are going through that area of the brain, and so we got to make sure how that was even shaped in the brain.
Yeah, and it's really powerful what you're saying about alarm systems, right? Because there can be false alarms.
That's right.
And if I get a false alarm in my mind, I need to take a fight or flight situation or scenario or response, I should say. in a scenario that may not require that.
That's right.
So what you're kind of talking about here is the amygdala is that alarm system, which we'll get into in a minute, that was shaped by something.
Exactly.
And that dictates when I fight, when I flight.
Right.
And both of that could be, depending on the situation, the fight could be good or bad.
That's right.
Or the flight could be good or bad.
Right, exactly. And there are other areas of the brain that we haven't tapped into yet. All of this works together, right? And so there are places of the brain where my long-term memory and short-term memories are stored. And so the amygdala can grab from those experiences and say, hey, you know, this happened to you before, protect yourself.
They're like file cabinets.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to look at it. So just go through the files and you're in trouble.
That's right.
So that's how the amygdala works. And you gotta be careful and protect your brain to make sure you don't let things come into your life that can hinder you, because that's gonna be committed to memory, and the danger is it can become an emotional pattern, not just an individual emotion.
Right, now I know we talk a lot about that. Why don't you say just a brief bit about that, because patterns are crucial. So now if I have thought patterns and emotional patterns, I can develop fear patterns, right?
Exactly.
So that before having you comment on that, let me just bring up this slide real quick when we talk about the amygdala. So, you know, it all kind of works together. Like Terry was mentioning, your visual cortex, or you might see something, it's translated through the brain, you see it as a threat, the amygdala begins to make me consider my behavioral responses and psychological, physiological responses, and that emotion of fear begins to send a literal chemical reaction through my body, which makes it real. And so I can develop a pattern. So would you say that fear patterns are a little bit more dangerous than just a fear moment, because this is something that can consistently come up in my life?
Absolutely. And the difference between a pattern and a moment essentially is there's one element of the equation that's missing between the moment and the pattern. So fear, or a pattern I should say, is perception and an emotion. Right? A perception and some sort of threat, maybe something like that will create an emotion of fear or what have you. Right. So that's like your instinct. So perception coupled with instinct creates an emotion.
Right.
The pattern is when that emotion is tied to an experience now.
Right.
That's when it gets anchored. Right. So now it's not just an individual thing that happened, right? Or just some emotion that pops up, or just a moment in time that goes, passes, and moves on.
Right.
But here's something that impacted my life, impacted my mind.
Right.
And I hung on to it. And anything that reminds me of that circumstance, it doesn't even have to be the same circumstance, my brain relives that, right? And so that's why I often use this. We could be sitting there, remember the commercial, the Kodak commercial, I see your truth.
Yeah. That's right.
Getting all emotional watching it and everything.
Right.
Like, because they're sitting there watching a commercial, a Kodak commercial.
Right.
But they might see a kid with their grandmother and their mind goes back to, I miss my grandmother or whatever.
Right.
That's how powerful the brain is. Or you walking through the mall and a song comes on, you remember the smell of the person you was dancing with at the prom, what y'all was wearing, this, that, and other, and your prom was 50 years ago.
Right.
So it's things like that where fear is concerned, to where when that emotion is coupled with an experience, that's when a pattern is born.
Yeah, and that what you're saying is so critical, and I hope everyone is really listening out there, because when we think about fear, you have to think about, you know, you have to have the courage to look at where you might have patterns, right? And how they might have been shaped, what's been anchored, because these things are literally, you know, grabbing our lives and holding on to them in different areas. And so I want to kind of build on what you talked about, and that kind of moves us to another arena, and you touched on this. So here's another element to this, and that is the power of trauma. When we think about trauma, something traumatic that happens, and even as you can see here, you know, whether you're a child or an adult, something happens traumatic in your life. And when you go back to that place, it creates a sense of sadness or what have you. And we all are trying to figure out, how do we rise above trauma? How do we leap over trauma? And so when you think about this, Terry, I mean, trauma is something that creates one of those experiences that do anchor. And, you know, there's a lot of sensitive issues out there. I mean, there's people that have been hurt as a child. There's really detailed things that have happened to people. People that were hurt by maybe a guardian or someone who they should have been able to trust, or got into a bad accident or had a bad situation. And it just takes one thing. And I'll share this really quick, and I've shared it with you before, but I'll never forget we were playing hide and seek in my house. And I was a little kid, and so I had this toy chest. And so I got the toys out and stuff, and I hid in there. It was playing hide and seek. And the next thing I know, they must have learned that I was in there hiding. So instead of just saying, "We found you," they sat on top of it. And it was completely dark. I was hot. And I said, "All right, you know, like, okay, y'all got me, like, let me out." And they wouldn't let me out.
That's great.
Next thing I know, fear began to set in, being in this enclosed space, right? And I still remember to this day, I was a little kid, but you know, when I got out of there, there was some people rolling on the ground and stuff. I was upset because I was like, how could you do this? This isn't funny anymore. But it's amazing how an experience like that, if you let it, it can take you back to that place with something that has nothing to do with that.
Right, you can get trapped in that toy chest in different areas of your life.
Right.
And so you can start to roll around.
That's right.
With people in the office, in the community. And
absolutely.
Like
in your mind.
In your mind, right?
Yeah.
You're not literally, hopefully you're not literally. We haven't had any issues, so
exactly.
Hopefully you're not, but yeah, it can really start to develop a pattern of how you respond to people, how you treat people, how you react to people. And so it's things like that we really have to be careful of. But I think what happens is we grab a hold to that experience before the experience grabs hold to us. Right. And I think that's what is critical, is we have to learn to, at some point, let go of that experience. It doesn't mean that we forget it. A lot of people are trying to forget.
Yeah.
And that's not how the brain works.
Yeah.
You're not just gonna walk away from a memory. Right. But you can let it go.
Yeah.
You can put it down, and we'll talk about strategies, I'm sure, throughout this series. But that's a critical thing. And then understanding that it's not real right now. Right. In the moment. Right. Like training your brain that experience really happened. Right. But it's not happening right now. This is a different situation.
Yeah, and even beyond letting it go is also being able to grab it and guide that memory. In other words, I have the memory and the memory is real, but I can control how much that memory impacts me, as you said, right now. Yeah. And I can also impact, you know, if I have a memory of something that happened, I've still got different ways of handling that opposition that I feel. Like I can rise up to it. And, you know, I went through some things as a child, or, you know, some issues even in my home with my mom, different things, but it's up to me how I control that feeling when it comes. Like, am I gonna use it to say, you know, I got through that and I'm gonna get through it again with this situation that's facing me now, or am I gonna go into this dark place and be depressed? That still is a decision. And that's what you were even saying about brain, the neuroplasticity, the fact that the brain can grow and it can rewire and it can create new connections is so important.
That's the biggest thing. And that's what I meant when I was saying let go, is I have command over it. Right? I can pick it up and use it for fuel, like what we're talking about. Or I can like choose to just let it stay right there. Because you don't belong in my life right now. Right? And I have command over that emotion now. I'm mature enough to actually manage how I feel. And that's a certain emotional intelligence that we all want to get to. It's not that we're trying to eliminate these things. We manage them. We keep them in their proper place, because fear could be positive too. There's a question I'm gonna ask you at some point.
Absolutely.
And sometimes fear should guide your decision. But there are times what we're talking about right now where you're right, like you want to mature and grow to where you have command over it. And the thing that I found out most out of all the studying I've done, experiences, this, that, and other, and talking with people, is the most powerful way to overcome a traumatic experience is to create a new one. but you got to have some courage to do that.
Right.
Like if I have trust issues, which you know my background, I've had some pretty severe trust issues.
Right.
I've been let down by people that I really, really, really,
Right.
I mean, trusted
Right.
in a deep place.
Right.
Well, I had to learn to trust again. How? By trusting.
Yeah.
There's no way else around
No
it.
way.
There's no secret.
That's right.
I had to learn to trust somebody that didn't do that to me. They have
Right.
nothing to do with that experience.
Right.
Trust them, and when they prove themselves to me that they're trustworthy, now I have another experience that I can tie. And that experience is just as powerful
Right.
as the negative one.
Right, right. And that is so crucial what you're saying, because if we can't create new connections, new experiences, new ways of positive trauma, right?
Yes.
A controlled trauma that I'm saying, and I'm going to use this and say, how do I maximize the good that has happened and re-establish that some things I thought were true, I found out that it doesn't have to be true,
Right.
or there's another way, or there's good people too that look this way, or that sound this way, or that remind me of this. And so now I share my little toy chest thing, but you got to share something about fear. What's something that you've had to deal with fear?
Well, I'm gonna look directly into the camera.
All right.
I'm gonna come to this one because I need a close up. So I'm afraid of
Okay.
heights, and we were driving. When I say we, I'm not gonna say any names, but Michael E. Parker was driving a car, and we were going across the bridge, and he decided to drive on the edge of the bridge, and he drove on the edge of the bridge that was on the passenger side. I was the passenger, and I didn't appreciate that very much. And so that experience wasn't the most positive experience that I had with you.
But now I didn't start that fear. You already had a fear there.
You didn't. You just brought it into my life at an inconvenient time. But I can drive on the edge of the
I
bridge
made you
now.
go into your file
I can
cabinet.
drive on the edge of the bridge now.
Really?
I can. Now I'm still uncomfortable, but I can make it across
Now,
the bridge.
how is it that you might be more fearful on a bridge or something than you are in an airplane, right?
So the airplane is enclosed.
Okay.
So I don't feel like I'm gonna fall out.
Okay.
Like if we fall, everybody's falling.
Yeah.
Because the plane, right?
Yeah.
Versus on the bridge, I can be the only one who falls.
So it feels like
It
that.
feels like I'm gonna
Right.
fall. The very first time I walked across the Golden Gate Bridge, been in the Bay Area my whole life, was
Right.
like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Grown man.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
I never walked across the Bay Bridge.
Wow.
Because I don't want to. And my wife left me. She walked and just kept walking. I was by myself.
Really?
I was.
But did you face
I
it?
made it all the way across
Oh, that's
and all
great.
the way back.
That's great. Now, see, somebody else might feel like, well, that's nothing, right? And then they might have something that you be like,
Yeah.
that's no big deal.
Public speaking.
Exactly. So you can
don't
speak
have that
publicly.
issue.
You don't have that. Some people see as more gruesome than death itself.
That's right.
But that's amazing about how our amygdala it responds
That's
to
right.
things based on things that's in our brain file cabinet.
And what's interesting is I have no idea where that fear came from.
Wow.
It wasn't even anything traumatic.
That's amazing. That's
Now,
amazing.
what is traumatic, though, is I feared death for a long time. I don't fear death anymore. I greatly respect it.
Sure,
But there was
absolutely.
a point where I feared death because when I was 4 years old, I ran into the middle of the street to pick up a ball. My brothers were playing catch. And when I leaned down, you remember back in the day, the push handle cars?
Yeah.
So it was driving down the street about 45 miles an hour, and the doorknob scraped my forehead.
Wow, you could have
So I
lost
was
your life.
this close
Yeah,
to
yeah,
losing when
yeah.
I was 4 years old. Took me about 2 years to cross the street by myself.
Wow.
I became a whole other level of a mama's boy
Yeah.
at that time. 'cause
Well,
I
see,
went straight to
but you
mama.
could have got to the point, some people, adults, and can't drive
Yes.
because of maybe an experience like that. So it
Exactly.
still is how much did you let that impact you?
And I had to learn how to face it because not long after that, my great grandmother who lived with me passed away, and that feeling came back.
Wow.
My grandmother who lived with me passed away, that feeling came back.
Right.
When I was a freshman in high school, a teacher of mine that was a mentor of mine passed away mid-year at a heart attack. That feeling came back
Right.
to me. My sophomore year, I actually saw somebody get shot and killed. I can still see it in my mind. It's like ingrained.
Right.
I had to learn throughout my life. It's like over and over and over, I had to face that fear that I faced when I was 4 and learn how to manage that. So
Right.
I didn't live my life afraid to die.
Right.
I had to learn how to live my life loving to live.
Right, which is a different thing. It seems similar, but it's very different. And I appreciate you sharing those things. I mean, that is really real stuff because, you know, we all got those things, you know, and we could all go into that place in our life where we have to admit there's some things that really shook us to our core. But like you said, it's how you manage it, and that's why you can't change it. And so if you don't change how you think about it, it's not going to allow you to move forward as a person. And so, and you never know when these experiences are going to hit you. I mean, I share with you real quick, and we'll go into, I want to build on this last segment based on what you just talked about, but I told you when I was too young to be watching a scary movie, and I jumped out there with some adults that was at the house and snuck around the couch. It was Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Beautiful. You don't remember Invasion of the Body Snatchers, do you? Beautiful. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, see, you went to sleep, and then an E-pod, which was this cocoon thing, it made another version of you, and then you died, and it was, so I had to, they called me and said, go to bed, and I had to go by myself in the dark, and I had to go to sleep. I said, we're going to sleep. I'm definitely gonna turn it to an E-pod, because I was too young to process, but it's something that's so simple, you don't know how things will impact you. Next thing you know, you know, that's an extreme kind of funny example, but how many times do we see just this movie of life and then realize that we're watching someone else's journey, story, something that happened, and we're assuming that reality has to be my own. And that's the danger. And that brings us to this, and let me build on this, Terry, from what you just said. Let's talk about, in closing, as we wrap the show up, we got to say a little bit about the ants. And tell us a little bit about this. I don't want to, I'll let you talk about this, but this is critical because we've got very traumatic experiences that happen in our life, and we've got great stuff that happened in our life, right? I know you as an athlete, you were an accomplished track runner, you basketball player, football player. There's a lot of good stuff that we all have done, but there's something about these ants that makes some things in our life more prominent than others. Talk to me about it.
Automatic negative thoughts. I mean, it's automatic. It's like negativity always gets the first chance. It's amazing how it works, right? And so, and if that's all I know or believe, I'm in trouble. Because they get the first chance. And the ants, you know, it's very rare you just see one ant.
That's right.
It's very rare. I don't know if I've ever seen just an ant.
And if it is, it's like a one that's going to seek out to tell the troops to come.
I mean, there's always ants. And that's how thoughts are. It's never one thought, right? And even if it is just one or two or whatever, it's like you ever kill them and it's like they're all over me. It's like that's how your mind can get. And sometimes people feel that way, right? Sometimes you feel negative and don't even know why.
That's the truth.
Ant colony, just walking around your mind.
Just wake up that way.
So we gotta learn how to, when that thought comes into our mind, how to deal with it immediately. But we have to have an answer for it. And that's where a lot of people get stuck, right? Because it's an automatic negative thought, and then I believe it and I act on it, and then I'm in that cycle. I haven't built up any mental capacity to deal with that first blow that's coming into my mind. So when somebody says, don't do that, something like, tell me, you know what I mean? Or I need you to do this, or you get pulled over by police. You know how fast, I wouldn't go in that fast. You know, parents telling kids, don't do, I didn't do, it's always something like, calm down, pumpkin. Okay. We always got something. We need to learn even to do that to ourselves. Like, you know, I need to get healthier. You can't get healthy. That's gonna take, so we gotta learn when they show up, identify them and deal with them right away. But the only way we can do that is if we have the right information and the right strategies to combat those automatic negative thoughts.
And even knowing that it's possible, right? Because when something is automatic, you think it's not possible, it's automatic. But you don't realize that there is the potential to change what happens after that automatic thought comes. And so, go ahead.
You can automate the response.
Exactly.
And that becomes just as automatic. It's not like the negative thoughts go away, it's just they don't mean nothing. Because I have an automated response.
And I like the automated response because it's like you can send something to a website or fill out an application. It automatically says, thank you, Terry, for sending your application in. You can be so trained in your how you deal with fear that you get a thought that it denotes fear, and it automatic response is that I know that that's not the end result, right? That's an emotion. Be able to feel that. Now, wrap this up for me though with this this slide that I know you use sometime when you're teaching. Talk a little bit about these characters here, these ant characters.
So these are just some of the automatic negative thoughts that might pop up. You know, you got the general ant always trying to be bossy and tell you what to do, the label maker ant, even when you label yourself, the unfair ant or embarrassed ant, which is, you know, the embarrassed is one of the 7 fears that we talked about. The mini ant or the maxi ant, you're too little or too big. You know, the blame, the why me's, frustration, anger, you see fears right up there in the middle.
Right.
So there's all these different things that we have to deal with, right? This is the colony that exists in our mind, right? You know, I can't, I won't, you know, it's too hard, I'm afraid, I don't want to do it, it's going to take too long. All this, like, just garbage, really, that's not even real. That we can actually turn into a pattern of thinking, which is going to turn into a pattern of how we feel or emotions, which is basically going to turn into a behavioral pattern if we're not careful. So we got to get some mental raid.
Exactly.
And get the spray and kill these ants that exist within our mind, because they're coming. And we got to be trained and we got to be strong enough to deal with them. And one of the strongest ants that we have to deal with is fear.
That's right. Very well said. And I think that's really fitting to kind of, you know, wrap this show up on, is that, you know, these automatic negative thoughts and this whole situation of fear, you know, it's almost like you can have a lot of different ants, a lot of different thoughts, as you mentioned, but fear is almost, you know, it almost can become a driver. Like it creates the environment even for the other ants to be more successful. It's like the queen ant. And so I really appreciate what you've shared on this show. It was very priceless. And so I'm gonna be asking you to come back into our part 2. We're gonna go deeper into From Fear to Fuel and talk about how do we get out of this mess, right? So we're gonna deal more with that. So thanks again, Terry, for jumping in on the show.
Sir.
I'm gonna have you come back. So I wanna wrap this show up, and we're gonna just talk real briefly about what is our next show. I hope you all really enjoyed this, and we're gonna again be having another part to this. But before I tell you about that, I wanna remind you, if you're watching the show tonight, I want you to remember that you can go to urco.com. As you can see on the screen, this is the website that you can register to join the movement. So if you're seeing this show even live or even later, make sure you go to urco.com, register, and you can download our apps, become a part of the club. There's so many things that you can do in URCEO. And again, this is something we want everyone that's watching this to make sure that you're a part of. We also want to remind you of Live, Learn, and Earn, because we believe in living a life that has an uplifted approach, an uplifted mindset. And once you become a part of our group, you'll learn about using our Uplift app to even live this life of mind fitness, being mentally fit, and then being able to learn. We're learning, just like in this show, we're learning more about how to overcome those 4 enemies: insecurities, fear, mediocrity, and what am I missing? Insecurities, fear, mediocrity, and there's one more I'm missing. But yeah, I'm missing one. Insecurities, overcoming fear, mediocrity, and there's one more that I'm missing. But y'all, no, it's there though. It's right there. So, and the other one is self-ignorance. That's what it is, making sure that you do not have any self-ignorance. So that is why we have to keep learning. Got to have it fresh on the mind. You see that? So we got to always stay brushed up and ready. So remember that we're always learning. And then lastly, you can earn. So we have an affiliate program, a tiered affiliate program that will allow you to keep on earning as you begin to share the message of URCEO with others. So if you don't know how that all works, get inside, find out more about it, because this is, again, a movement that we want to spread all across the world, helping people be more successful in their life. So last but not least, our show, our next show, again, we want to remind you, we're going to have From Fear to Fuel Part 2. And that actually should say June 10th. So that show will be on June 10th. Today is June 3rd. So make sure June 10th that you are ready to watch From Fear to Fuel. Now, Terry, you promised me you're going to come back. We're going to go deeper. We're going to talk a little bit more about, you know, what is the process of moving from fear to fuel. So I look forward to you coming to that show. And until then, you want to say anything to the folks before we go?
Yeah, we won't leave you hanging. We won't leave you in fear. We're going to show you how to turn it into fuel and be motivated created to become the CEO of your life.
Well, why don't you give us our ending remarks just to let the whole world know?
Let the whole
that's
world
right.
know that you are a CEO.
You are a CEO. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next week, June 10th, from Fear to Fuel, Part 2.